Well, I'm going to introduce the speaker, but if anybody wanted to follow him around, you'd probably be about as wide as a 2x4 and weigh about 17 pounds because he's a busy guy. And he seems to be all over the county, and I know he's concentrating now on Highway 68 area. But Mike Weaver was born here, born in Corral de Terra, so he's a native Californian and probably been invested emotionally and politically and psychologically to the good world we have here. And that probably is somewhat has to do with his activism today. He's a graduate of UC Santa Barbara with an emphasis on economics and American history. He's the chair of the Highway 68 Coalition. They do litigate as well, so they're serious. Their mission is to protect the rural character of the Toro area. And this includes a wide variety of issues, but normally it would be what the league would normally be talking about too. Water quantity, water quality, traffic development in general, protecting the scenic highway status of Highway 68. We do live in a beautiful area and we hope that we can continue to have it this way. He's been on the Fort Ord Community Advisory Group. He serves currently chair the Toro Area Land Use Advisory Committee that's under the Board of Supervisors. He's been on TAMC advisory committees. He's been active in the TAMC TAMC's failed 3 times. The last 3 times they put a sales issue, sales tax. 4?
Thank you.
I haven't been here as long as he has. And in many ways, TAMC has not gotten the message about kind of misguided development seems to be in their back pocket too. And until they get the message and have a more broader based application of their sales tax, and they're trying a new one this year, and I'm sure we're going to hear a little bit about it. Besides protecting the beauty and the assets that represent that beauty, he's been active in opposing what I call mindless development. But he's been active in the general plan issues, trying to create new regulations, new concepts about including them. He's been, he was very much opposed to some of the earlier stages of the Rancho San Carlos development outside of Salinas. Prunedale Overpass was part of that whole process, definitely presented in 2 different arenas, but they were all mixed together. That project ultimately died. Anyway, he's a busy guy. Let's let him tell you what's going on in Highway 68 corridor. Mike, it's yours. What I want to ask you to do is speak for a duration and take questions later, and I'll probably grab the mic when we do question and answers. Okay. All right.
Oh,
welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, George, for thanks for your kind words, and I see a lot of very familiar faces out there today. And anyway, I'm real pleased I was invited. I thought, well, how do we talk about Highway 68? So I thought I would begin. I do it in about a 4-part series here. We'll start with some background, and then we'll take a visual trip from Highway 68 from Salinas to Highway 1. And the Highway 68 Coalition does do more than Toro, although Toro does take up a lot of our time, the Toro planning area, because that's where it seems a lot of the projects are, the big projects are being proposed. I recall back, I guess I've been involved in Highway 68 issues for 30 years now, and I recall back in the 1990s when Salinas was growing, had a growth rate of 3% a year, and they were just growing leaps and bounds, and a number of us would go to the Salinas Planning Commission hearings and City Council hearings and argue that Salinas could not sustain a 3% annual growth rate without reductions in levels of service to its existing residents or increases in taxes. They had a community development department at the time, not a planning department. They were flush with money. They were just accepting project after project, hundreds of houses at a time being built by Class B developers out of Fresno and Sacramento. It was really frightening. But from our perspective, one of the biggest frights was the city was collecting traffic impact fees from these developers that were going into the city coffers, but they weren't being shared regionally. So Highway 68, Highway 1, surrounding highways were being impacted by all this growth, all this new traffic, with no recourse, nothing to do other than continuing to accept a declining level of service. So we would complain, and we wouldn't get anywhere. Two of our current supervisors were city councilmen at the time. That was Fernando Armenta and Simone Salinas. I don't recall them ever voting no on anything. And it just went on. I guess I made enough noise. I was appointed to the Transportation Agency for Monterey County's Citizens Advisory Committee. I was approached at the Monterey County Fair by then District 3 Supervisor Tom Perkins. Had kind of snarled at me and said, "Congratulations, you've been appointed. I didn't know." And he says, "I wish you a lot of luck. They're complicated issues." And I says, "Well, gosh, thanks." You know, my accepting that appointment at the time, my thinking was that if only more people would get involved and study the issues, well-meaning people, and do the research, why we could all make a positive impact on county government and make things better, especially with transportation. The Citizens Advisory Committee was mandated by both federal and state law. They wanted citizens overseeing where money was going for transportation, because it was often got involved with politics, who got the money and what it was being spent on. So citizens keeping an eye on the money coming in and money going out was a good thing. So that was what I understood the task to be, and also to learn more about transportation issues and the laws and everything behind it. At the time, the TAMC staff numbered about 6 people. Their offices were on Alisal Street behind the Public Works, Monterey County Public Works Department. And that's where the TAMC Citizens Advisory Committee would meet. I went to a couple meetings and I started asking questions. One question I asked is, why don't the Citizens Advisory Committee members have copies of the Regional Transportation Plan? Why don't we have copies of the Congestion Management Plan? These were published documents that were supposed to be relied upon and read. And well, they hemmed and hawed, but we got documents. At that time, the level of service countywide was to be level of service C. I think everybody here may know. If not, levels of service on county roads are graded from A to F, A being the best, smooth sailing, F being gridlock. C was, you know, sort of an average level of service, and the county general plan and their transportation plans all required a level of service C being maintained on county roads. And that was part of the congestion management plan. If you could require a level of service C, you could probably stop a lot of gridlock. But anyway, our level of service is dropping on Highway 68. A plan came up to start MST. Everybody here probably remembers and knows what MST is, Monterey Salinas Transit. Do you know why Monterey Salinas Transit was started? Because it was recognized traffic was so bad on Highway 68, we needed to develop a way to get people from Salinas to Monterey and back and get them out of their cars, you know, get more of them on a bus and maybe cut down on the congestion. Well, you know, many years later, MST has grown into a county-wide endeavor, subsidized now by tax increase. And yet, I live in Corrali Terra, and if I want to go to Monterey, I can't get back in the same day. I mean, and Carmel Valley too. So you just, you know, you get on the bus and then you go from there to Marina Transit Center, the Salinas Transit Center, and then maybe the next day get back again, you know. So it hasn't worked, easing congestion on Highway 68. I did some research. We asked if the Citizens Advisory Committee could offer suggestions for the agenda, things to discuss, and staff was reluctant to have us do anything except their agenda items. And their agenda usually included long talks from representatives from Monterey Salinas Transit and bus schedules, and your eyes would glaze over. So we got sort of, they're okay that we could get stuff on an agenda at least to discuss it, because we weren't decision makers. We were there to offer advice to the Transportation Agency Board. That's what we were tasked with. I did research and reported on the official plan lines for the Crowley-Terre bypass. I did research and reported on traffic impact fees. At the time, San Benito County, next door to us, was getting $20,000 per single-family dwelling on traffic impact fees for roads and all in San Benito County. And in Monterey County at the time, oftentimes it was zero, or a pittance of some kind, and there didn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to putting impact fees on the amount of impacts that these developments were having on our roadways. Bottom line is that a supervisor, not you, Karin, but a supervisor at the time asked, "What is Mike Weaver trying to do? Chase development out of Monterey County?" ? And shortly after that, the Citizens Advisory Committee was excused. And then later, some were reappointed, and then finally they were excused too, and the Transportation Agency went to what's called their outreach program, which means they go out to luncheons and talk about traffic issues. But as far as having a citizens group reviewing the dollars and cents and all that, that went away and is still gone. There's been some ideas in the past on how to deal with Highway 68 and its traffic issues. There were two big ideas. The 1960 Toro Area Plan, the first Toro Area Plan in Monterey County, has a road around Crowley-Terre and San Benancho, so through traffic would bypass that, what is now called a choke point. That was on the books. In 1977, official plan lines were adopted by Monterey County. Some property was dedicated to those plan lines. The county purchased some property. But the thinking is as you come down eastbound and you get to the end of where Toro Park Estates is, and then that curve is there just before the Toro Cafe, the road would go straight and go up past the sycamores and up around the hill, and then die in back in before Lorella's grave. And that was to take through traffic from Salinas and Monterey back and forth and not have to slow down and leave that area 68 as a frontage road. Well, those official plan lines were used as assumptions for alleviating traffic on some pretty big developments that happened out in the area. The 1,031 homes at Las Palmas Ranch. It was an assumption at the Markham Ranch, 140 homes. It was an assumption at the Meadows of Crowley-Terre, 121 homes. What happened? It was never built. There was never enough money, so it was never built. The substantial amount of money that the developers of Las Palmas contributed towards that bypass was given back and used for other things on River Road, but it was never built. So that just fell by the wayside. It was just erased. A pencil eraser. Let's just erase that idea. The second big idea to come along was the Fort Ord bypass, also known as the Southwest Alternative, and this got up a pretty good head of steam about 1992. And again, the alignment started at the end of Toro Park Estates, went up through the hills, and died in back about Delray Oaks. And again, that was to take traffic and run it east and west without having to stop or, be conflicted with all these roads going in and out. Two significant things happened in 1997. The first is that our transportation agency for Monterey County finally got around to declaring Highway 68 as being officially level of service F, failure the worst, 1997. The second significant thing that happened in 1997 was FORA, the Fort Ord Reuse Authority, adopted the very ambitious Fort Ord Reuse Plan. And the major traffic mitigation measure was to be the Fort Ord bypass. There was a 1,000-foot wide official plan line dedicated across Fort Ord for this purpose. What happened? Fast forward 8 years, and in year 2005, the FORA board met and came up with what they called a reallocation. They essentially took another eraser and just erased the idea of a Fort Ord bypass, but without limiting the amount of development that was going to happen on Fort Ord. They considered the Fort Ord bypass too expensive and undoable, but they didn't modify their development plans much, if at all. In consideration for not building the multi-million-dollar bypass, FORA agreed to instead send the County of Monterey a check for $275,000 to mitigate their traffic impacts on Highway 68 forever, total $275,000. The last time I checked, they hadn't even sent that check to Monterey County. So part of the reallocation was not only erasing the Fort Ord bypass, but the understanding was that with all the development that would be going on at Fort Ord, off-site road improvements would be needed. They're off-site, there would be impacts to intersections and different things, bridges and different things, and a lot of money was going to have to be spent off-site to handle all the traffic that was going to be created. And FORA initially thought that it was their responsibility to do so. But again, this was considered too expensive and undoable, so part of the reallocation was to keep all developer impact fees on site, physically on Fort Ord, and just let the surrounding areas sink or swim on their own, which meant the surrounding areas would experience a continuing decline in levels of service on their roadways, and it meant that off-site improvements would have to be paid for by taxpayers if they wanted them. And that was a part of previous TAMC sales tax measures A and Z that both failed, was to help pay for off-site improvements for development on Fort Ord. So more recently, the county has pondered what to do now about Highway 68 with these two. And don't get me wrong, I don't like new roads. I don't think new roads solve much or do much. I'm not into building new roads over vast terrain. But the point is that those were mitigation measures. Those were accepted as justification for approving a lot of development, is that help is coming down the road, and then the help was erased. So what do we do now? Based on conversations with some Monterey County officials in the Public Works Department and elsewhere, an idea came up to widen Highway 68 to 4 lanes from Toro Park Estates west to Corelli Terra, and it stopped. So we asked, well, how much, what improvement would that do? I mean, just 4 lanes from where 4 lanes are now to Corelli Terra and stop. And honest to God, the answer was, everyone knows that traffic drops off westbound after Corelli Terra Road. There essentially is no traffic after that. Everybody either goes to San Benancho or Corelli Terra, and then traffic drops off. That was the answer. I thought they were kidding. They weren't kidding. That was the plan. So, and that plan went further because that plan was going to be implemented by the anticipated approval of 3 big projects that were coming down the pike. I go to a lot of public meetings and sat through listening to a lot of this, and we'd hear that 70% of the traffic is through traffic, and another development on Highway 68 doesn't really affect the traffic that much because everybody knows traffic's coming from Salinas or Monterey and back again. 70%. At one time, the number got as high as 80%. But all that went away now because that was misthinking, because everybody now knows that traffic doesn't go any further than Corelli Terra. So the assumption was that 3 big developments coming along were going to implement this new plan, and the timing was going to be for the Broccoli Ranch, which is also known as Harper Canyon LLC, was going to come along first, and it was assumed that would be approved, and they were going to pay for a study 4-laning the road to Corelli Terra. The second project was going to be the Corelli Terra Shopping Center, and that would pay for some of the 4-laning and also improve the intersection to mostly facilitate the needs of the shopping center, to our way of thinking. And then finally, the Freeney Ranch, the big Freeney Ranch, was going to pay for some more four-laning, and that was going to complete the four-laning to Corelli Terra. Well, oops, the Toro planning area on Highway 68 got blasted with 3 big development projects in close succession, so we alerted the Highway 68 Coalition people. What's resulted is the Broccoli Ranch had big problems, no on-site water, access issues. It's down a narrow existing rural road off San Bonancho, the developer named Meyer Road. The Farini Ranch subdivision, initial access was going to be through Toro Regional Park, you know, the exit off there. They were going to go through the park. Well, that was a non-starter when the public found out about it. They didn't want roads for developers going through our county parks. So then it shifted to another new intersection and along the straightaway there, and another signal light. And then the shopping center, it was crazy, the arguments for how it was going to improve traffic out there. In one case, the developer's argument was going to be a destination. It was going to bring people from all over to there. It was going to be so wonderful, and it justified the need for a big shopping center. The second was that it was going to make moot the point that the locals wouldn't have to go anywhere to do any shopping anymore. We're not going to leave and go to movies or see our doctor, visit our friends in town, run errands, and then come back again. All our needs would be met at the shopping center. So, and they were arguing that people would come from Las Palmas Ranch to the east and Pasadena and York Road to the west, all to come to the shopping center to shop. So you got people coming east and west and back again. And this was somehow going to improve the traffic. All 3 of these projects are in litigation. The Corelli Terra Shopping Center is at the 6th District now up in San Jose. There's briefing going on that. And the Farini Ranch and the Harper Canyon are both in litigation, have been briefed, and will be scheduled for hearings in Monterey County Superior Court. The Highway 68 Coalition filed a suit on the shopping center and also on the Farini Ranch. Landwatch also filed suit on the Farini Ranch, and then the Highway 68 or the Meyer Road group, the people living along Meyer Road, those dozen, 16 houses, filed suit, as did Landwatch on the Harper Canyon LLC. Circling back to Fort Ord, they did put in a lot of people use Imgen, the 12th Street Gate, and Imgen to cross Fort Ord now, and that has taken some of the load off of Highway 68. But with all the development going on now on Fort Ord, it's just a matter of time before that just becomes so choked that people are going to opt to go back to being choked on Highway 68 rather than going through Fort Ord. So we have a gloomy, we can look forward to more gloom and more traffic congestion. So that's the first 3 parts. We'll now go to part 4, which I want to take a little trip from Salinas West to Highway 1 on Highway 68. The stretch of road from Blanco Road in Salinas to the Salinas River Bridge has been eligible for official California Scenic Highway status since the mid-1960s. On any given Tuesday, the Board of Supervisors could send a letter to Caltrans saying we want to include this in our scenic highway in Monterey County. To date, it has not been, and I was told by somebody big in agriculture that it might be agriculture that's holding it up. Caltrans does not make land use decisions in Monterey County. They can't. It's the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors that ultimately make land use decisions. Caltrans could give advice. They're often overlooked. But they do monitor scenic highways, and they send inspectors by, and once a highway is no longer scenic, they remove it from the list and it's gone forever. You never get it back. So part of the Highway 68 Coalition's mission is trying to uphold and protect the scenic highway status that we enjoy. Starting out from Salinas, it's a past project, but I thought it was rather significant. Many of you may remember where the Italian Villa restaurant used to be. It's now a car wash. You know, it used to be a restaurant and a bar and kind of a way stop, kind of a quiet little ranch-style building out there. Well, that was proposed for a high-rise hotel at one point, and it was going to be called the Steinbeck Towers Hotel, this looming hotel. So the 68 Coalition didn't think that was too good an idea. I thought it would be growth-inducing, you know, and lead to more sprawl along that stretch. We did some investigation, and we discovered that there was a problem. Part of that property is in the city limits of Salinas, and part of it was in the county of Monterey, the part that they needed for parking for the hotel. So we did a public records request and found in the file a letter from Planning Director Bob Sliman at the time. Attorney for the hotel project, Tony Lombardo, had gone to Bob and said, "Oh, there's an oversight here, Bob." And Bob had said, "Well, that is an oversight. I'll write a letter saying, oh, there's no objections to including that as part of the city project." Well, to our way of thinking, that isn't the process one goes through. There's an outfit called LAFCO that you need to go to, which is properly the way that you annex property into a city, is LAFCO, not just, and I hear Luana laughing because, of course, that is part of the Fort Ord issue now with Monterey Downs, is who owns what, you know. Well, the Planning Commission approved it. We spent $500. We appealed it to the City Council. We lost there too, but it lost a good head of steam, and maybe it just failed of its own accord as just being a bad idea, I don't know, but it didn't get built. So fast forward sometime later, we went to another City Council meeting, and they have meetings in the afternoon, then they have dinner, and then they carry over into the evening. Well, in the afternoon session, the City Council passed a new resolution mandating pleasant entrances into the city. All entrances into the city were supposed to be pleasant to attract visitors and make everybody feel better about arriving at the city of Salinas and having it look good. This was in the afternoon. That evening, they approved turning the Italian Villa restaurant into a car wash. So we got a car wash instead of a high-rise hotel there, along with some other strip mall type development that increasingly just keeps creeping down that stretch of road. Heading further west, there's now a project pending called Riverview at Las Palmas. The developer is Gary Shingu. The attorney for the project is Tony Lombardo, and it is being assisted by the retired Monterey County zoning administrator and planning assistant director, Dale Ellis. And they are seeking a use permit and design approval for a 70,000 square foot assisted living facility. As you cross, heading westbound, as you cross the Salinas River Bridge, as you look up slightly to your left, you might see the looming red flagging up there blowing in the breeze. They want to put a multitude of buildings up there, a retirement home, but a lot of buildings. 15.74 acre site. It would provide residence and services for a range of seniors requiring various levels of assistance. So this was sent to the Toro Land Use Advisory Committee, and I'm chair of it, but I'm not speaking for them today. It was continued for more information and questions. It hasn't come back yet. I'm just reporting what's going on. I'm not advocating for anything here today. But the issues that were brought up, and this was going to be a 24-hour-a-day, 365-day-a-year, 3 shifts of workers coming and going. How many workers? Oh, between 90 and 100. Okay. How many beds? 144. Everything from Alzheimer's patients to little casitas where people could move to. Traffic, noise, activity, physicians, physical therapists, nurses coming and going. But it was going to go through the clustered area. The entrance was going to be through the residential neighborhood of Las Palmas, #1. And the people there were justifiably concerned. I mean, this wasn't the quiet neighborhood that they bought into, and it was, so we sent it out with a bunch of questions. It has not come back yet. I expect it probably going to take a general plan amendment and an EIR, but they were hoping to get it just to the zoning administrator. We head further west, and we get to the Badger Hills parking lot across from the Toro Cafe. The Highway 68 Coalition supports hiking and open space and all. Love it. Don't support that parking lot that's in clear view from the highway. We were told that, and there were no public hearings on this. The BLM just said, this is what we're going to do. They wrote up a report. They found an outfit in Colorado that looked at some old AMBAG report and found that one part of this AMBAG report, it said Highway 68 was level of service B, as in boy, which it might be on the 4-lane stretch as you get further towards Salinas. But with that, they just bypassed all public hearings and said, well, we're going to plant oak trees there to shield the parking lot from view so people can park off, pull off, hike. They spent the money, they never planted the trees. So there's a few pines there growing. The pines were going to be temporary, but we can't get BLM to consider doing anything else. The director of BLM said he went out and threw some seeds out. He broadcast some oak acorns out there, and they haven't grown. You know, that was our answer the last time. Anyway, getting back to briefly the Las Palmas, the specific plan for Las Palmas, the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors struggled mightily with this project, and the total number of units there were bandied about, but what eventually was approved were 1,031 single-family dwellings, including affordable housing units in Las Palmas, a residential community. And the thought was that if we allowed a condensed number of houses there, it would prevent sprawl from heading out elsewhere in the Toro area and elsewhere on Highway 68. Well, by our records, 1,030 houses had already been built. So the question was, well, how do you plan on putting in a huge care facility when the specific plan called for 1,031, 1,030 has been built? The county apparently hadn't kept count, but they did go back and count and recently admitted that, yes, 1,028 houses have been built. And so the project, as of now, is in incomplete status and is waiting for the developer to make a move and decide to go forward or not, or modify his plan. The San Benancho intersection, of course, was modified. That was considered a choke point. Double left turn lanes were created. The bridge was widened. Approximately a $3 million project ended up being about a $5 million project. Oak trees, mature oak trees, a lot of them were cut down for that project. Mark Kelton owned part of the property there on the corner, the developer of the Freeney Ranch. He was asked through the grapevine, he didn't care much about it. He thought that would facilitate entrance down San Benancho Road and a possible entrance to his project. But what we did find in a Public Records Act request was that he wanted assurance from the county that they would not object to, if those trees were cut down, it would make the houses he was planning to build behind San Benancho School visible. And he wanted to ensure that the county would not object to that or listen to anybody objecting to that or take that into consideration. So they paid him. He sold part of his property. The intersection was widened. We were promised mitigation would be the planting and maintenance of a lot of oak trees to help facilitate the scenic highway. The drought came along, they weren't maintained, they're dead. The oak trees that were planted are almost all dead. We got a concrete retaining wall and small dead oak trees out of the project, and the locals don't think it really helped much in terms of increasing helping anything at that intersection, maybe a little bit, not $5 million worth. The Corelli Terry intersection is proposed for improvements. A proposed plan was sent back for a redo. We caught that the Corelli Terry villas, the villas there next 64 units. They had no ability really to make a left turn coming out of there and heading to Monterey. And when asked about it, the consultants said, well, they can make a right turn and go down to San Benancho Road and then make a U-turn at that intersection. The intersection that had a sign that said no U-turns. And then they can turn around and they can go back to, they can go to Monterey. Well, that, it's totally unacceptable. They didn't know how many units were there. They never bothered to ask. They sent the plans back for a redo. They're planning on approving this on a mitigated negative declaration. Right now, TAMC, our transportation agency, has received a grant to do a Highway 68 corridor study. So they're studying it from Salinas to Highway 1. And consultants have been chosen, I understand, and they're going to do a study to try and figure out just what to do with Highway 68. And they're also studying wildlife corridors, because as you probably know, there's a lot of wildlife that crosses from former Fort Ord across 68 or under 68 at a bridge and heads to the hills, either in Toro Park, Toro Regional Park, or Crowley Terrace, San Benancho, and then back again. I see this wildlife all the time. I mean, turkeys, foxes, coyotes, badgers, skunks, all kinds of wildlife is crossing there. So that's what TAMC is doing, and we wish him the best on this, and we hope everybody can get involved in this. There's community meetings, and we can have some input and have a good study that results from this. We then get to our Laguna Seca County Park, the racetrack. And I go back to, as a young boy, I born and raised in Crowley Terrace when it was country. It became country club, but it was country then. And I remember a knock at the front door one evening, and I went to the door, and there were 3 men standing there, and they said, "Is your father home?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Well, go get him." And so I went and got him, and he says, "You stick around here. Let's see what's going on." And they were 3 men from the Sports Car Racing Association of the Monterey Peninsula. And they said, "We're physically going around and knocking on everybody's doors in the area. As you know, we have 1 race a year. It's the race that used to be held at Pebble Beach. And now it's at this new facility. And we know it creates noise, and we know it creates traffic. But we're here to ask you if you would allow us 2 events a year. We promise never more than 2. And they're not going to be back to back. They're going to be, months apart. But if we could only have 2 events a year, we could, it creates a little money for charity, and we might be able to do some good things." And I remember my father saying, "Well, yeah, I mean, that sounds reasonable, 2 a year." So the majority of people said, yeah, 2 a year would be okay. Well, of course, it went from 2 to 5 to 10 to 15 to something going on up there practically all the time now. The last use permit amendment was signed by Monterey County Supervisor Sam Farr. It was amended back then. It expired in 1981. They've been operating without a use permit since 1981. They're operating on a concession agreement. We say that there's a lot of issues involved. I don't know anyone that wants to shut the facility down, but there has to be a balance. There's traffic issues, there's water use issues. I mean, it's an overdraft in that area, the water table. Noise issues, all kinds of issues. It needs environmental review, and we've asked for it, and we're hoping with the new planning director that we can get some environmental review on it. It was a gift to Monterey County from the Army in 1977. I like to think that maybe it's the Army got tired of picking up the beer cans and cigarette butts after the races and willingly gave it to the county because it was a liability issue. But it was a gift, and it was intended for an occasional diversion for the locals. In other words, the locals could go see a race there, a road race or 2 a year, or a few a year, but not as a cash cow and just something going on all the time. We then head a little further west to the Bishop Ranch, Pasadena development that received a 60% housing density increase when approved. It was approved as a private club with limited access for public golf only with a reservation. So Big Car Week has come along, and now it's hosting Legends of the Autobahn, which is open, free to spectators, come one, come all. You're directed down South Boundary Road in the back entrance, and when you leave, you're buying drinks at the bar, food, it's open to the public, and when you leave, they shuffle you right out onto congested Highway 68, right out through the front gate. I don't think, the EIR never considered that when it was approved, and it's another thing that's operating, I don't think, with the proper approvals. The Montero Ranch, many of you know the Montero Ranch and its poor history of going into foreclosure. Richard Rosenthal, attorney Richard H. Rosenthal, yes, George, a few minutes? Okay. Part of the settlement agreement on the Leaper 2 lawsuit was that it be audited to see if there was compliance with the conditions of project approval and the mitigation measures. So we we discovered two things. One, there were supposed to be public hiking trails up there. So when visiting with the county attorney on this, we asked several times about the hiking trails. He researched it, looked for information, finally found the dedication paperwork. So it was dedicated, but he said, we have no record that it was ever accepted by the county. It was dedicated, but no acceptance. So we said, well, that's awful strange. And he got looking around, and Richard says, that's hard to believe. But he looked around, and he turned one form over, and he says, there it is, there's the acceptance. Well, it was our supervisor, Karnstrasser Kaufman, at the time that accepted the public hiking trails at Montera, and we're now looking to see where those trails are because they have the survey notes.
Let's use them.
Yeah, let's use them. They have the survey records, but they don't necessarily have where they are. I'll wrap up by saying that a current concern, and Tinker knows about this, Tinker's here today, is what's called the PG&E Community Pipeline Safety Initiative. Many of you may remember last year, about 6-8 months last year, PG&E was going down Highway 68 at night and replacing portions of the main gas line that runs along that highway. It's right along the edge of the road. And that was done. Well, now they've got something, a PG&E Community Pipeline Safety Initiative. Well, Tinker had strangers show up at her driveway. I had strangers come up my driveway from Santa Rosa saying they were mapping vegetation that needs to be removed and pointing to oak trees. And I said, well, that's an oak tree. That's not vegetation. There's ordinances in this county. You can't just willy-nilly go out and remove oak trees. Well, they're dickering with homeowners and, we'll pay you so much, we'll remove the tree, we'll replace it, or we'll relocate it somehow. It's all very vague. And what's troubling is PG&E refuses to identify who they're working with in the county on this initiative, or who in Caltrans are working with. And I can't get anybody to return my calls yet at the county as to whether they know anything about it. So it may be a safety thing, but they replaced the lines. They're talking about going in now and removing trees for safety purposes. And they're also talking about going on to former Fort Ord and removing trees for safety purposes. So we think it's less an initiative. It should be defined as a project with maybe some public meetings and some environmental review. So with that, I will close. I'm happy to take any questions.
An opportunity to talk about the water situation out there?
Right. The focus today was on Highway 68 and the traffic. Yes, that could be the future of another meeting. Yeah, the water situation out there for sure. Yes, yes. Any other questions? No. Beverly has a question.
I would like you to talk a bit about the airport, the thing that's out there on the scenic highway.
The big wedding cake, they call it. Yes.
And what's coming up there? I understand there's more development planned.
Yes, there is more development planned. Yes, the Highway 68 Coalition caught a lot of flack about objecting to that project, and we never objected to safety. We tried to discuss this with the airport. The objection was what was going to be a new intersection just past Tarpey's heading westbound. It was going to be a 50-foot wide roadbed that coincidentally went around to the north side of the airport. The same north side of the airport that the attorneys discovered was in their master plan, their 1992 existing, their current then master plan, proposed for development for more money. So it wasn't so much about a safety issue as a new roadway that was going to be creating traffic impacts. And, we were badged with objecting to safety along the way. Well, we never were, but they could have settled, they could have done something else. They refused to. And so it was litigated, they lost. And so there is a roadway there now. It's a service road that goes around that's generally about 10 foot wide and is for purposes of if they need to access that. But there are significant plans. They're working on a new master plan, and they have significant plans to do quite a bit of development to bring in more money. So you might want to keep your eyes and ears peeled on that. And the water situation out there is about the same as the rest of the peninsula. Where's the water going to come from for all this development, we ask?
This is a scenic highway,
Yes.
and Was there a mitigation plan to hide this thing? I mean, I find it amazing.
The consultants were from Orange County and Phoenix, Arizona. Okay? Phoenix, Arizona, the same consultants that lost the lawsuit that did such a poor job on the EIR were hired on a no-bid contract for $985,000 to then come in and do the new master plan for the airport. So the mitigation was to all those tiers was they were going to plant oak trees in those tiers. And we said, well, what kind of sterile environment is that, a 10-foot wide tier? I mean, how are you going to plant oak trees and allow them to get big? And then won't they conflict with the planes, you know? Well, then that was thrown out the window. Well, then they thought maybe they'd plant hanging vines. And so not much has happened out there. They did do a pretty good job about planting new oak trees in front of it. And as a result of this suit and the goings on, one tier is now missing off the top of that. It would have been another tier higher. But we did we did public records requests, and quite frankly, the airport was exploring closing Tarpey's down. They own the property that Tarpey sits on and lease that property. And there was talk about what would it take to buy Tarpey's out so we can just like go forward. So that's an historic site. A lot of people enjoy eating there, and we just thought that it was so wrong on a scenic highway to just talk about closing Tarpey's and putting in a 50-foot wide roadway for purposes of developing out the north side. And so anyway, that's where we are today. Beverly, thank you for your questions. Any other? Yes?
Just as a point of interest, I attend many of the events at Laguna Seca.
Yes.
I live in Carmel Valley and want to go up Morellas Grade. I never get to Exeter, hardly ever. They always route us around Ford or the back way.
She attends many events at Laguna Seca. She says they try and route traffic out and about and around. We have suggested many times that when you sell tickets, encourage people to go that back way in instead of through the main gate. If you have a GPS, it will direct you to the main gate. Signage is supposed to be going up on Highway 68, directing you down River Road or Reservation Road or South Boundary Road. Oftentimes the signage is minimal if it's there at all. So it's a matter of just trying to get the staff to cooperate on that. Yes, sir.
When John Phillips was elected, I had the hopes that a reasoned, disciplined mind would be brought to some of these questions that we're talking about today. And it doesn't seem to be the case. Do you have any suggestions of what could be done, or is there anything being done to help get him to understand this situation more clearly?
That's the question. Is there anything to get Judge Phillips, newly elected Judge Phillips, to understand what's going on Highway 68 and the problems that have been brought forth today? I would suggest, oftentimes it doesn't work, but letters, attendance at public meetings, just talking reasonably and rationally, maybe. It's about the best we can do, other than electing supervisors that care about these kind of issues. Yes?
Back to Laguna Seca, Walleye Canyon Road is really a nice travel to get to the track from Reservation Road, but there are very few people that use that. And I think it's not used for very many events either. For historics, they open it up, and I think that's it. That road is very scenic from Reservation all the way into the track. And would that be an option?
There's 3 entrances to Laguna Seca. Yeah, the Barley Canyon you mentioned, and then South Boundary, and then of course the main gate. So yes, we've asked multiple times, where's the traffic plan? Can't get the traffic plan. Why can't we get the traffic plan? What is the traffic plan? Well, it's, and so you get this sort of got a plan, don't really have a plan. Oftentimes the plan goes sideways. I do know that what drives a lot of us crazy is on Highway 68 on the days prior to a big event, they're doing testing up there, and there's cars coming and going, purveyors are coming and going, and they're often using that main gate, and there's no law enforcement there, and they'll be pulling out and force merging out into traffic, or it's a mess. And if there's highway patrol there, they're often reluctant to get out and direct traffic because once they do, by law, they own the intersection and they have to stay until the problem is completely gone. And they don't want to do it. And then you've got Scramp that is hesitant to pay law enforcement to monitor these things. So there's a multitude of problems. And it all goes back to too many events, too big, too much, and needs more review. And perhaps a new use permit.
There are many promises made but not followed through. Does the county and the city, after they approve the project and put conditions on the project, is there anybody following through on whether the conditions are fulfilled?
The question is, as the county approves a lot of projects, is there anybody following through on to see whether these conditions are taken care of? Attorney Richard H. Rosenthal has sued the county twice in what's in year 2000, and the first was known as the Leaper Lawsuit 1. Judge Silver sent the county, and they opened up a new department at the time to go back and review. A lot of the projects that were being reviewed were on Highway 68 because conditions hadn't been met or complied with. County promised basically never to do that again. Fast forward to 2010, they were sued again. And they settled. So they're just wrapping up now an audit of the 10 projects that were selected. And there's a lot of well-meaning people that are working for this county, a lot of really nice people that are trying hard to make things better. And then you run into a lot that maybe just don't care or got other things to do. So it's a constant struggle. One big problem is poorly written conditions. Poorly written conditions, conditions that can be interpreted different ways. And you get a bunch of attorneys together interpreting a condition, and well, it doesn't exactly say that, so we can kind of slither sideways and do something a little bit different. That's the big emphasis now, is if you're going to approve a project, approve it with conditions that have meat on the bones, that do what they say they're going to do. Yeah. Thank you very much for having me today.
I would like to add a footnote, and this relates to traffic. The state legislature last year approved legislation that basically says no longer will delay or violation of level of service be defined as a significant environmental impact. And the new metric will be vehicle miles traveled. And what appears to be on the horizon is if a project cannot reduce its vehicle mile trips below the average, it will be defined as a significant impact. So while we may lose congestion or delay as something that determines what is significant under the Environmental Quality Act, we have a new metric that's going to be very interesting and perhaps result in far more significant impacts than what we are identifying right now. So it's kind of wonky, but it is a major change to how traffic will be analyzed in the future. We still have the level of service requirements in our general plan, so they'll have to address that as well. But we will have a new way to look at traffic in the future. And it ties more directly into reducing greenhouse gas emissions and motor vehicle emissions, and in the long term is probably very positive. I want to thank Mike for a wonderful review and a historical perspective on what has happened at Highway 68. I don't think there are many people who could give us that perspective, and thank you very much.